In the autumn of a long-past era, under the gray skies of Kyoto, the greatest samurai in the empire, Lord Kenshin, known as the Silent Storm, stood on the verge of defeat. He was a man whose life had been a straight, flawless line. He had never lost a duel, and his sword strikes were so precise and swift that it was said the enemy was vanquished before they even heard the sound of the blade being drawn. But today, in the garden of the great temple of Mount Tranquility, his opponent was not an armored warrior, but a stooped old monk named Jinan, whose only weapons were his saffron-colored robes and a serene smile. The challenge was not a deadly duel, but something far more humiliating. Jinan pointed to an ancient maple tree that was surrendering its last crimson leaves to the autumn wind and said, "Lord Kenshin, if your sword is, as they say, an extension of your will, then use it to cut a single falling leaf in half as it descends." For the Silent Storm, this was a clear insult. He drew his sword, Knight's Lightning, a flawless blade that had been washed in the blood of hundreds of foes. As a leaf danced away from its branch, Kenshin moved. His body and sword became one in a motion that could have split an arrow in flight. But his blade sliced through the air, a breath too late, and the leaf, whole and untouched, gently settled on the ground. He tried again and again. Each time, his movements became more perfect, faster, but each leaf, as if with a mind of its own, eluded the path of his furious blade. Kenshin's pride, like a glass shield, cracked and shattered. A cold sweat beaded on his forehead. He, the unrivaled master of control, could not control the path of a single dying leaf. Then, the old monk slowly rose. As another leaf began its journey to the earth, Jinan picked up a dry twig from the ground. With a motion that was more like a long sigh than a strike, he lifted the twig. Without a sound, the twig met the leaf and split it into two perfectly equal halves. Kenshin knelt in disbelief. He was defeated. In a voice that could barely be heard, he asked, "How?" Jinan replied, "Your sword screams too loudly. Your will to control creates such a ripple in the air that the world moves out of its way. You must find a sword that knows silence. Go to the distant mountains of Izuma, where iron is born from the earth. Find the swordsmith named Masashi. He is the only one who can forge a silent sword for you, Kenshin." A man whose entire identity was built on his perfection left Kyoto that very night without a word to anyone. His journey to Izuma was long and arduous. He passed through bamboo forests where the wind sang strange melodies, crossed rushing rivers that smoothed the stones, and traveled through villages where people lived with a peace that was foreign to him. Along the way, he would look at his sword. The blade that had always been his pride now seemed like a loud, clumsy tool in his eyes. After months, he finally found Masashi's forge. But it was not a grand workshop, but a small, smoke-stained hut deep in the mountains. Masashi was a small, elderly man with powerful hands that seemed older than the mountains themselves. Kenshin respectfully recounted the story of his failure and made his request. Masashi stared into the samurai's eyes for a long time and then said, "I will not forge a new sword for you. The flaw is not in the metal, but in the spirit that wields it. I will reforge Knight's Lightning, but only after you have learned 3 lessons. The first lesson was water." Masashi handed Kenshin a woven bamboo basket and said, "Fill this basket with water from the spring at the top of the mountain and bring it here." Kenshin was bewildered to see the basket was full of gaps. He ran to the spring, filled it, and raced back with all his might. But by the time he reached the forge, all the water had leaked out. He tried again and again, each time faster than the last, but the result was the same. Exhausted and defeated, he sat by the spring. As he watched the water, he saw how it slowly soaked into the moss. An idea came to him. This time, he gently submerged the basket, allowing the bamboo fibers to become saturated and swell. Then, with slow, deliberate steps, without trying to fight the nature of the basket, he started his descent. This time, only a few drops were lost. He had learned that sometimes strength lies in yielding to the nature of things, not in fighting it. The second lesson was fire. Masashi put him in charge of the forge's bellows. He said, "The fire must always be the color of the setting sun. No darker, no brighter." Kenshin began the work with all the precision he possessed as a swordsman. But every time he pumped with force, the fire flared white. Every time he held back, the fire began to die. For days, he tried to control the fire, but it had a will of its own. Finally, tired of struggling, he stopped and simply watched it. He listened to the dance of the flames, to the fire's breath, and to its need for air. Then, instead of imposing his own will, he began to respond to the fire's needs. He was no longer controlling. He was cooperating with the fire. He had learned that mastery is not in the imposition of will, but in understanding and harmony. The third lesson was iron. At last, Masashi heated the blade of Night's lightning in the fire. He handed the hammer to Kenshin and said, "Strike." Kenshin struck with all his might. A jarring, deafening sound rang out, and the metal bent unevenly. Masashi shook his head. "You are shouting at the iron. Listen to it." He took the hammer and struck the glowing metal a gentle blow. The sound that arose was like a temple bell, not the clash of metal on metal. "See, the iron tells you where it is thirsty for the hammer. You only need to listen." They worked side by side for days. Kenshin learned that each hammer blow was a question asked of the metal, not a command. He learned that the silence between the strikes was more important than the strikes themselves. After a month, the work was finished. The sword that emerged from the fire was no longer Night's lightning. It had lost its arrogant gleam. On its blade were subtle patterns, like the ripples on a calm pond, patterns that, to a perfectionist, might be seen as flaws. Masashi said, "This is no longer a weapon. It is a companion. Its name is Sasanami, which means little waves." Kenshin returned to Kyoto with a sword he no longer recognized. He was no longer the same man. His walk was slower, his gaze deeper. He went straight to the temple. Ginen was waiting by the same maple tree, as if the entire past year had been but a single day. Another single red leaf began its descent. Kenshin closed his eyes. He no longer thought of the leaf or the target. He listened to the wind, to the weight of the air, to the gentle dance of the leaf, and to the silence of his sword. Then, in a single fluid and soundless motion, he drew the blade. It was not a swift strike, but an offering. The blade rose and, without any effort, met the leaf in its path. There was no sound. The leaf, without its course being altered in the slightest, was split into two perfect halves, which floated down to land gently on either side of his feet. Kenshin sheathed his sword and bowed to the monk. Ginnon smiled. "Your first sword was full of your will, your anger, your pride. It was so loud that it frightened the world away from it. But Sasanami is empty. It is empty of your will. And because it is empty, it can harmonize with all things. You did not cut the leaf. You, the sword, and the leaf joined in a single dance. This tale teaches us that the highest level of mastery and strength is not found in absolute control and the precision of one's will, but rather in the ability to let go of control and achieve harmony with the natural flow of the world. Kenshin initially believed that perfection was the elimination of all flaws and errors, but he ultimately learned that true perfection lies in accepting imperfections and moving with them. This story shows that sometimes, to solve a problem, one must not fight against it, but listen to it. Instead of trying to bend the world to our will, we must learn how to become part of its dance. The greatest power is found in a silence born from deep understanding and harmony.